members of Jaagaran, The Awakening. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a program in which we wish to discuss the unfolding environmental crisis off the coast of our sister isle Tobago. It is a very important matter. It's a matter which I hope to treat with in a manner which we will all learn about the impact, the effects, and how possibly we may be able to mitigate a reoccurrence of these types of situations. And without further ado, we have special guests who will come on the program. Without further ado, as is with our tradition, let us go quickly to our theme song so that we can get into our program. Welcome again, viewers and listeners. This is our episode of Jaagaran, The Awakening. I am, of course, your humble host, Dinesh Rambally. This evening, we turn our focus to the unfolding environmental crisis off the coast of our sister isle, Tobago. On February 7th, 2024, a disaster struck the shores of Tobago. A mystery vessel leaking oil ran aground on a delicate coral reef, setting off a chain reaction of environmental devastation. This evening, we delve into the heart of this crisis, exploring the causes, consequences, and the search for answers. The unfolding environmental catastrophe off the coast of Tobago demands our attention, but it also demands accountability. And sadly, and I say this with utmost respect, the response from the government has been somewhat troubling on both fronts. In the wake of this disaster, we have seen images of beaches blackened by oil, of wildlife struggling to survive, and of local communities rallying together to tackle the crisis head-on. But where is the swift and decisive action from those entrusted with protecting our environment and our people? It's been over a week since the mystery vessel leaked oil and ran aground, yet the government's response has been tinged with confusion and incompetence. How is it possible that the vessel remained unidentified for so many days, despite clear evidence via the internet pointing to its origins? How is it acceptable, I ask you, the viewers and listeners, that an oil spill of this magnitude was allowed to occur in the first place? Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't about cleaning up a mess. This is about environmental justice. It's about ensuring that those who commit criminal activity on our borders are held accountable for their actions. It's about standing up for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and particularly Tobago, who deserve better than empty promises and half-hearted apologies. So let me be clear this afternoon. The government's response to this crisis has raised more questions than provided answers over this environmental disaster. But we, the people, cannot stand idly by and watch as our nation is ravaged and our communities are left to suffer. It's time to demand action. It's time to demand accountability. And it's time to ensure that tragedies like this never happen again. This is not just a crisis. This is a wake-up call. And it's time for all of us to answer it. Let me also say this isn't just a story of pollution and destruction. It's a story of the resilience and determination of the people of Tobago. This evening, we will also shine a spotlight on those heroic Trinbagonians who have volunteered to help battle to save their beloved island from this environmental crisis. So I say to you, let's navigate the murky waters of the Tobago oil spill, uncovering the facts, exposing the truth, and demanding accountability. And this afternoon, to help me do this, I have two distinguished guests. One will join us virtually, Mr. Gary Aboud. Of course, we know him. He's no stranger to the marine landscape. He is the corporate secretary of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea. He has been described as the inspiration of that esteemed establishment. He's an environment warrior, a voice for the downtrodden. He's not a stranger to these studios. He has joined me in previous programs, and so I'm very happy to have him join us virtually. Mr. Gary Aboud. Mr. Aboud, are you with us?
Yeah, thank you, Dinesh. Thank you for having us. I hope we can add something of value, and special good evening to your audience and to Professor Ramlogan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Aboud. And my next guest, who is in studio with me, Dr. Rajendra Ramlogan. I say doctor, but he is professor. And Professor Ramlogan, of course, a professor commercial and environmental law attached to the University of the West Indies. He holds his Bachelor of Arts in English Literature and a Bachelor of Laws from UWI. Professor Ram Logan has received numerous awards, including the Barbados Bar Association Prize, top final year law student, and the Faculty Prize, top second year law student. Professor Ram Logan graduated with a Master of Laws in International Legal Studies. This was from the New York University School of Law. He's a recipient of the Southern Basin Consortium Scholarship. LLM, New York University School of Law. Professor Ram Logan also proceeded to the University of Cambridge, where he received the Cambridge Commonwealth Trust and Overseas Research Student Awards. Graduated with a doctorate in international environmental law from the University of Cambridge. He's now a fellow of the Cambridge Commonwealth Society, and prior to his university career, Professor Ram Logan also worked in the local oil industry. So, you know, I could go on with his resume. I will want to end on a personal note that I have walked with these books to show him that I actually read his books as far back as I can recall. Judicial Review in the Commonwealth Caribbean, Professor Ram Logan, well then Dr. Rajendra Ram Logan. The Rise of Environmental Law in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Beautiful books, I must say. And maybe I should have put some dog ears on the books to make it look like as though I read them. But I have read these books, Developing Environmental Law and Policy in Trinidad and Tobago. So I know that he has been contributing. And if I may say, before I officially welcome Professor Ram Logan, one of the first cases you may not recall, which is the recorded, I very rare I get to, Mr. Aboud, very rare I get to, you know, pursue personal legal exploits. But I know one of the first recorded cases in this jurisdiction which dealt with economic duress as a defense. It was conceptualized by Professor Ram Logan, but fortunately it ended up in my hands. And I did the trial, and of course that is one of the recorded cases. It is the first case that adopted the law on economic duress from other jurisdictions, and we have that codified. I lost the trial, but the law was settled in that you could raise that as a defense. So let me officially welcome Professor Ram Logan. Professor, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Dinesh, and viewers, thank you. I look forward to being here this afternoon.
Yes. Professor, I want to hand over to Mr. Gary Aboud. And Mr. Aboud, I know with this, I know your time is short. I think he has roughly 10 to 15 minutes with us. If he's able to stay longer with us, I will be grateful. But Mr. Aboud, I wanted to get from you, what is your perspective, or what are your perspectives coming out of what you have seen in Tobago? In my monologue, in my introduction, I basically sought to recap how we ended up where we are today. But I wanted to get from you, you know, an up-to-date position, and what are your views on the effects of what is ongoing off the coast of Tobago?
When I was a much younger man, I met Professor Ram Logan, and we were both maybe 25 years ago. And we met at a time when we were at different ends of the movement to ensure social justice and rights, environmental rights. And although we were at different ends of the pendulum, we both had the passion to see things change and become better. Today, 27 years later, frightens me. The amount of time it took to get any information, to even deploy booms, the simplest of emergency response mechanisms. And today we still have no knowledge if there are any skimmers. I received a video this morning of the beach right next to the Magdalena Hotel, where it's unbelievable. I sent you the video, Dinesh, where you could actually see the thickness of the oil integrated into the sand on the beach. So we continue to have the concern about the schools have been evacuated, but the residents haven't been evacuated. There's statements that it's safe. I could imagine that the government and the Tobago economic interests are screaming out that there are cancellations and economic hardship. Certainly, I would understand that. But I have a hard time with statements that suggest that everything's okay if it's not. That's false advertising to tourists. It's false advertising to potential consumers of fish. Instead, I would have hoped that it would have been a more realistic and straightforward and honest and open and inclusive response to what has happened. with much more information sharing. It baffles me why it's taking so long to identify the vessel. And I fear that the reason why the vessel has been identified is because a foreign journalist has tracked it and identified all of the details of its whereabouts and where it's come from. But why would a country like Guyana import a tanker of crude oil from a still unconfirmed, undisclosed nation? Is it normal that an extractor who does not have a refinery should import more oil that can only be exported? It's quite a baffle. The Guardian today had an article suggesting that the importer had an interest in the Petrotrin refinery. Is that true? What really is the truth? Why is there this shroud of secrecy? Is this really what we earned when we became independent? Is this what we boast as a republic, that the people of the nation should have no say about anything, about how money is taxed, how it's spent, who receives it, how the contracts are awarded, how the procurement works? The whole mechanism of administration and the weaknesses of it are reflected in how this spill has been managed or mismanaged. So I don't want to sound like I'm not patriotic. As you would know, I would do anything for our flag and to promote the well-being of our nation. But sometimes I wonder, the people just seem to take it under the guise of it's not their responsibility. And I don't accept that. I don't accept that the workers and the volunteers who have gone out to assist should have been exposed to breathing the hydrocarbon without proper oxygen tanks. They give them a COVID-19 mask. I find it very unreasonable that the manner in which the entire event is continuing to unfold, we still have no statement of the volume of hydrocarbon contained in the vessel. The rumors which we were originally fed that it was a freight vessel carrying lumber have been so overturned and embarrassed. Where did those rumors come from? In the era of technology, after 120 years of extraction, and in an era when you can get on a phone or Google and search any that you want, that we still don't know who the cargo was consigned to. We still don't know the volume of cargo. We still don't have any clue as to how to stop it from spilling. Yesterday, we spoke to someone, a senior person in the THA, and he advised us that every time the tide falls and the vessel goes lower to the ground, more volume of oil, because it tilts when the tide is low, much more greater volume of oil is being discharged. So why aren't we being told this? Why isn't the skimmers that we have in the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan being utilized? What are our legal rights to prosecute the culprits? Is there any possibility? Nari Alfonso gave an opinion that we have no extra-regional authority to prosecute anyone in this situation. Well, of the 9 laws that we have listed, do we really have no rights? Professor Ramlogan would be in a lot better of a position to advise us on the Oil Pollution of Territorial Waters Act 1951 or any of the multiple other laws we have, on whether or not there is any potential litigation that could occur to recover some costs. And finally, what will become of all of the men who fix fishing nets, who will be unemployed for some time to come? All of the ice makers and the transporters, all of the jostlers who clean boats, that's what they make a living. They clean the boat when it comes in. All of the people who clean fish, who work for the people who sell. The people who sell might be able to afford a duration of time when they cannot sell. But the people who work for them on the bottom line of the food chain, what rescue is there for them, or for the small bed and breakfast facilities who have had cancellations? Is there any mechanism that we are devising to determine the real economic impact and the possibility of some sort of sacrifice, that we should all share a burden for those who are the most vulnerable and most in need? I know I'm dreaming, Dinesh, I know. I know. But unless we dream and encourage people to dream, it becomes much more difficult.
Now, Mr. Aboud, I want to thank you very much for your preliminary overview and very comprehensive at it. I want to ask you, how many minutes do you have with us still?
I want to hear Professor Ramlogan speak.
So, let me hand over to Professor Ramlogan, because I know in the lead up to the viewers to the program, Mr. Aboud was very enthusiastic when he heard Professor Ramlogan will be on the program. So out of, some obeisance and camaraderie with Mr. Aboud, let me hand over to Professor Ramlogan just to get the ball rolling on some of the laws that have been referenced by Mr. Aboud.
Thank you, Dinesh. Let me just start Gary mentioned something that is very important to note. He said it's 120 years that we have been involved in the hydrocarbon sector. I believe it was 1907 that our first commercial well was drilled in Point Fortin, and 1908 it actually produced. So there's a little bit of question over it's 1907 or 1908. But we're talking about over 100 years.
Yes.
And therefore, when you think about the longevity of the hydrocarbon sector, we certainly should have been in a position today to have a well thought out plan for dealing with these things. Now, let me just say something that I disagree with what you have said earlier. This spill, there's no fault that I believe at this stage can be attributed to a government or to anyone. Spills happen.
Yes.
I would just want to go back to mention to you that something that Trinidadians may not be aware of. In 1979, there was an oil spill off Tobago by a vessel called the Atlantic Empress that spilled 279,000 tons of crude oil off Tobago. It is still on record as the largest oil spill from a ship in the world. So we have a long history in this, but that may have, most people are not aware of that.
Right.
You Google it and you will see our role in that history. You had 2013, and Gary was very much involved in this with the Petrotrin oil spill. So, we have had this long history. And in between, I want to make a comment and say that I think it was in 2013, there was the famous BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the Horizon. Yes. And she was doctor, but now Professor Judy Gobin, and I brought that with me today, spoke about exactly looking at what happened in the Gulf of Mexico to prepare for Trinidad. And therefore the question that must be asked is whether we heeded that call to prepare. We have had the signs there. And what we saw happening here, my concern is not the politics of it, but the technical aspect of it. When there's an oil spill, the first thing you try to do is to contain it. After you contain it, you clean up. After you clean up, you monitor. You monitor both short-term and long-term. Gary mentioned the situation with volunteers. Just 2 years ago, there was an analysis done. They have been monitoring the volunteers for the Gulf of Mexico and BP. People are still complaining about the effects, health effects of that oil spill. So it is you don't just clean up. You then have to monitor, evaluate the impact on the environment, on your fisheries, on your people, your volunteer. That is something will go on for the next 10, 15 years. Yes. So what I am not seeing is that sort of structure. And before I go on with that point, I think it is important that we note you spoke about the law, and that's why I quickly ask you to, if I can look at this book that I wrote in 2003 or something like that. And the Environmental Management Act says very clearly, any person who through the release or handling of any pollutant or the arrangement for another person through any contract or other agreement to release or handle any pollutant which knowingly or recklessly endangers human health or life, commits an offense and is liable on conviction on indictment to a fine of $100,000 and imprisonment for 2 years. So it is a criminal offense under the Environmental Management Act that if you knowingly or recklessly endanger human health or life, which clearly you perhaps would have done in a case like this, then that is considered to be an offense under the Act. So, and if you do that, for example, in our waters, I would like to think that we have jurisdiction over persons regardless of their nationality. With crimes committed in our jurisdiction.
Yes. I would think so as well. But thank you for this opening salvo. I want to find out from Mr. Aboud if he's still with us or... Okay. Gary?
I'm here with you, of course.
Yes. I know you have to leave. We will continue the program, and I will ensure that I get a clip of this program to you. I just want, before you go, I want to let the viewers and listeners know that you did send me a video, which I will be showing on the program. This is a video which was taken by, your entity, right? Fishermen and Friends of the Sea. And I believe it was from Lambo in Tobago, which shows a large deposit of oil on the sand. So we will be showing that particular video. I want to raise it openly so that you can probably correct me if I have missed anything. Maybe Professor Ramlogan may have some insight into this. One of the points that I know Gary had raised with me, Mr. Aboud had raised with me, was that they are using, for example, one particular organic component called cansorb. And this cansorb now, TEMA has distributed that so that they can put this, along the shores in certain areas to absorb the oil. I believe particularly in the area of Magdalena. And this cansorb is supposed to absorb the oil. When you absorb the oil, you are supposed to return to pick up the globules. And from what I understand, what Gary and his team had pointed out was that whilst this has been done, in fact, they have not returned. So there was no follow-up mechanism to pick up the globules. So having applied the cansorb, that will absorb the oil into these globules that you can now, I presume, physically pick up or somehow pick up that to be, disposed of properly. That is a problem that they are facing. They are not seeing follow-up mechanisms. So I just put that if Gary wanted to raise anything on that point and to let him know, I will be showing the clips that he has graciously supplied me during the course of the program.
The clips were sent to us by one of our Tobago members. I also want to say that the cansorb is a limited response mechanism because the volume of oil you're talking about, when the oil comes out of the vessel, it doesn't stay in one place. It's moving with currents and tides. It's rubbing and splitting up. It's moving off. So when they apply it as best as they could, but it does not capture all of the oil. So it's not really a perfect solution. The real solution is, and what has not been said to us on D9, is can they plug the leak? How much more oil is contained in the vessel? Is there any hope that the oil can be stopped? Which is exactly what Professor said. We have to stop it, contain it, and clean it up. So we're working on the cleaning up side, but we have no information on the stopping side, and we have no information on the booms and the effectiveness of the booms and the independent analysis of the effectiveness of how the booms are functioning. There's been no word. I spoke to an ex-minister yesterday. He said, but he can't understand why they haven't done 2 layers of booms. Why do you only have 1 layer of boom? Because all you need is a wave to push volumes of oil over a boom. And if the boom becomes saturated and full, if the tide is moving in one direction and the boom is 24 or 36 inches tall, it's only a matter of time before the weight of the oil fills up the distance and starts to seep underneath. So there are more questions than answers, and I look forward to listening to the program. I will be listening on my journey, and I thank you all and wish you all the best, Professor Ramlogan and Dinesh, and to your audience. Bless you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for your time. I know you're very busy today. This morning when I contacted Mr. Aboud, he was already on the go. And of course, this evening, he, at the last minute, call, he agreed to come on for this limited time. So, Gary, thank you very
It's
much.
it's my birthday and I'm going to my birthday party, so I can't be late.
Happy birthday. I didn't know that. So, happy birthday from Jaagaran, from all of Jagrati TV, all of our viewers and listeners. Thank you. All right, so I want to thank Mr. Aboud for his insight into this particular matter. Ladies and gentlemen, in an attempt to achieve the input of Mr. Gary Aboud, and he's no doubt a very intelligent person, very experienced when it comes to marine affairs and matters involving oil spills and pollution. I wanted to make sure we were able to capture the most of his time. I say happy birthday to him and wish him all the best for the rest of his evening. I want to return to just a recap of the headlines before we continue the discussion with Professor Ramlogan. We do have a recap video of the headlines, which will bring most of us up to speed on what has been taking place. Thank you, technical team, for that video recapping the headlines concerning this major environmental disaster. Professor, one of the questions which Mr. Aboud did raise was the ability or lack thereof to prosecute perpetrators, those who may be responsible for this, the barge, finding itself in that disastrous position and now leaking its contents, hydrocarbons, into the water. And I take the point. I think we have covered it. If you wish to add anything to it, is fine, but I think you have covered where there is a law. The enforcement of it may be another issue, but we do have law on the books.
Correct.
And I am of the view and agree with you that once within our jurisdiction, whether nationality of Trinidad and Tobago or not, they can be prosecuted for breach of the relevant laws. Are there any other laws that viewers and listeners, members of the public, ought to be aware of in terms of how we treat with a situation like this, or what we expect the authorities to investigate in order to determine whether appropriate laws are breached and how we treat with them?
Well, I suppose while we're looking at evidence, they would be taking samples because the oil is fingerprinted. So you could know exactly this particular oil, where it came from and so on. But the major piece of legislation is obviously the EM Act. And the EM Act also have a special part of it that deals with endangering a sensitive area. The Bucco Reef is in the vicinity,
yes,
which I believe is designated as a sensitive area. So if that is the case, that also makes it a criminal offense. If you recklessly discharge a pollutant that endangers it. And that's the strongest legislation because it provides for imprisonment. Now, I don't believe this section has ever been used in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. This act is now 30 years old, almost 30 years old. Maybe there's an issue of enforcement, as you pointed out. There are other international, the oil pollution of territorial waters and things like that. But that, I agree with Nairi, that one would be more difficult because it's sort of non-specific and there'll be jurisdictional issues and so on. But we have clear legislation, very, very clear. And I assume that the DPP should get involved very early in this whole process in terms of building the requisite case that will satisfy a criminal law prosecution. But if I want to shift a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I still hold to my position until I know anything differently. A spill occurred. It's mysterious. It's obviously something that I don't believe at this point that someone deliberately, they may have recklessly, but to say they just pull up in Trinidad waters, no. But what happened thereafter is what is troubling for most people who follow this type of things in terms of what do we do when this occurs. And I mentioned that you go back to our long history in hydrocarbons, and therefore we should be ready for this, especially after 2013 and Petrotrin, after 1979 and the Atlantic Empress. So I believe it was in 1977, the government at that time developed the first national oil spill contingency plan. This plan was somewhat modified, I believe, in maybe 2004. So we had something there. We were thinking about this. But in 2013, in particular, there was a rather large, the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan of Trinidad and Tobago that was adopted in 2013. And this was intended to have Trinidad prepared to deal with all manner of oil spills and so on. So Gary alluded to this. This plan sets out in great detail, it's 135 pages, the response mechanism for when something happens. But we have not been hearing about this plan.
Right.
And that to me is troubling. It will be interesting to know whether this plan has been triggered. And I say this in the context that I read on the papers that on Sunday, the Honorable Prime Minister visited Tobago and said it's now a level 2 event. Now, in the national in the National Oil Spill Plan, we have Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. In terms of, and I'm saying in terms of Tier 2, Tier 2 is when it is a small or medium-sized spill which significantly impacts on possible areas of national support for da-da-da-da-da. So there it has reached what he considers to be at that level. I noticed Gary said it should be Tier 3. But what I thought was interesting is that from the beginning of this spill, we have been hearing about TEMA, the Tobago Emergency Management Agency. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at TEMA's website, and it's very interesting to see what they're about. And when you read what they're about, they talk about the sustainability, the vulnerability of humankind, disasters and hazards. But it would appear that TEMA, the intent of TEMA was to deal with things like storms, hurricanes, flooding, that type of thing. Yes. I can't see how an agency could, like TEMA, could deal with matters of a hydrocarbon oil spill. I really cannot see that. I don't know what capacity resides within an institution like TEMA. And the thing about it is, when I tried to figure out how TEMA got involved. So I have been doing a little research when you told me, yes, to come on this program. And at Tier 1, and I thought about maybe it's because it was considered to be a Tier 1 disaster. Tier 1 are oil spills where in-house response capabilities adequate. It impacts a low and in-house cleanup response is mandated. So I suspect if you have a very small spill, a Tier 1 means that you could have resort to your, let's call it in-house, but I don't know if any in-house capability resides with any public agency in Trinidad and Tobago. If there's a spill, for example, off Mondiablo, is it that the Penal DB Corporation could respond to a small spill there? I don't see it. These oil spills are specific, and I think that what concerns and confuses me is the lead role that it would appear that TEMA assumed or took or may have had to take. And that lead role, it perhaps explains why we are concerned about the level of response. Because I really don't know if TEMA had that in-house capability to do it. And yet they were the ones out there. And the important thing that I have noted in the management structure for dealing with oil spills in Trinidad and Tobago, as contained in the 2013 contingency plan, there is a requirement of the lead agency. And the lead agency is the organization in charge of coordination between public institutions, private interests, and international authorities for oil spills in Trinidad and Tobago. Who is the lead agency? The lead agency is the Ministry of Energy and Energy Affairs. That is the lead agency. And from the lead agencies, you have an incident command team that will be activated when there's a threat. Where are all these things? So that is what confuses me. Is it that there's now an abandonment of the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan? And I think other people have been asking that. I saw on Facebook Professor Judith Gobin from UWI. She was asking, because a lot of people are saying, well, where is this national? I really cannot see Tobago doing it. And then you look at the Environmental Management Act. And this is what it says. Whenever the authority reasonably believes that a release or threat of release of a pollutant or any other environmental condition presents a threat to human health or the environment, the authority may, after consultation with the minister and in coordination with other appropriate governmental entities, undertake such emergency response activities as are required to protect human health or the environment, including A, the remediation or restoration of environmentally degraded sites, B, the containment of any waste, hazardous substance, or environmentally dangerous conditions, and C, such other appropriate measures as may be necessary to prevent or mitigate adverse effects on human health or the environment. It is clear. Where is the EMA in this? That is a question that must be asked. They are the entity. I could be reading from a plan, but statutorily, that is the entity that was given the authority by Parliament to have been taking the lead in a matter like this. Now, I do understand also they would not have the resources, perhaps, and the Ministry of Energy is, in fact, the lead agency. But it is between the two of them. Where does TEMA come into this? That is what I can understand the interest of TEMA. It's a Tobago matter. But being interested, being passionate, which is understandable, being caring is understandable. But this was a national incident.
Well, is it I managed to catch maybe 10 minutes, if that much, of the press conference held on the 11th, Sunday 11th. It was a press conference jointly chaired by the Chief Secretary of the THA and the Honorable Prime Minister. And what I gathered from that was that it was clear that they didn't have the necessary resources easily available, or I should say closely on standby, to deal with this in Tobago waters. So they were now seeking recourse to oil companies who would now contribute to the disaster emergency plan. Mm-hmm. And I think I managed to catch in the audience when reporters were fielding their questions and interrogating the issue. I saw the Minister of Energy, Minister Stuart Young. He was certainly there, and I saw one of the Tobago MPs as well there, and Minister of Government. The point I want to make is that this plan, the 2013 contingency plan, is one which they are following, but because of lack of resources, there isn't an avenue or easily something that could be employed because you don't have the resources available in Tobago. That is where there is room for TEMA to, somehow get manpower available to somehow be on the coastline. Mm-hmm. Maybe they may not even be trained properly to deal with this issue, and that is another issue hopefully we can discuss, because Mr. Aboud also spoke about the fact that people and volunteers included were not wearing proper safety masks mm-hmm. and the proper equipment to conduct cleanup exercises. So is it that in your view that we have, I say we loosely, meaning as a country we have dropped the ball in being able to deploy or execute this contingency plan because of lack of resources?
That is a hard one to answer. I noticed that they mentioned also that Kaizen is out there.
Yes.
Kaizen is a private entity, and one would assume that they probably had the capability. So the question would have been, on a Sunday would have been 4 days after this incident. Why it is that it took 4 days to get Kaizen? Is it that Kaizen had to bring equipment into the country to deploy?
I just, sorry to interject here, but I think the Prime Minister spoke about the fact that, and I think he did mention Kaizen, that their equipment was somewhere in the waters surrounding Trinidad. I got the impression he was saying that this equipment now has to be moved to Tobago, not that they had to necessarily be brought in, but I take the point. So I just throw in that I recall him saying that.
You know, we have all the oil majors in Trinidad and Tobago. BP, Shell, Chevron, all the oil majors are here. I would think it's strange that these oil majors are not in a position to have on hand the type of chemicals, the equipment and so on to deal with oil spills. They must. an international operator like BP operating in our waters, especially after the BP Horizon incident, must have a rapid response plan. So the question is, I guess, whether or not there is that ability to access the resources of the oil companies and so on quickly. Now, I would have assumed that that is part of the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan, that people, when something happens, we all get together. There's a lot of things that are, that we need to understand from this, because one of the things that I remember after going, I want to go back to Petrotrin. After that 2013 Petrotrin spill, there was just like now, a huge furor in Trinidad and Tobago on this spill. And a lot of people were writing to the president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at that time, Mr. Anthony Carmona, seeking help and so on. And I recall that the president at that time appointed a group of academics from the University of the West Indies and the University of Trinidad and Tobago, of which I was a member. And we all did this as service, public service. There was no question of payment or anything like that. And we prepared a comprehensive report in the aftermath of that spill, which was submitted by our former principal, Brian Copeland, to the president. And that was handed over to the government, I think, in 2014, February. And a National Environmental Assessment Task Force was appointed by the government. Again, that happened then. And so you kind of feel a little surprised that this happened now. I mean, you're talking about, I note here there were 25 experts from UE and UTT. People, I remember we met, we gave off our time, we did our best, and we presented a report. Where is that report? Would that report have been helpful in a case like this? So I think that we actually need, sad as it is, to take away from this incident all the questions that are being asked now. Maybe the time is there that we have to go back now. When this is over, we have to go back and say, look, what went wrong? How do we fix this? Do we need to change legislation? But I think for now it's not a question of legislation. Legislation would not have helped you in your response.
Yes.
You need to have a plan. All I have found is that 2013 plan. So I have to assume that plan is, in fact, the latest and the plan that should have been implemented. It's a comprehensive plan, and it sets out all the laws in it. I just took a little extra care. Everything that you do, everything that is supposed to happen, it's there.
Now, this is not by any means, and nor do we intend to make I intend to make political statements as such. But are we not, in a sense, pointing to the line authorities seeking to reinvent the wheel in this latest disaster? Because that is where my concern comes in, and I think the concern of a lot of the members of the public, that here it is you have, and certainly I haven't heard anyone blame anyone for being the cause, apart from those who were the ones tugging.
Yeah.
So we now understand that you would have probably had one boat called the Solo Creed tugboat towing this Gulf Stream barge, and whatever happened, the one toppled. So apart from them probably recklessly treating with how they went about carrying out their business, I haven't heard anybody point to any other blame. I think the concern is that, well, we should have had something that would immediately kick in gear, that would have mitigated this vast expanse of disaster that we are seeing. And you have referenced, 120 years industry experience, being in the hydrocarbon industry. You have referenced 100 years in one instance in terms of our capability. The fact that we had contingency plans, we had other major oil spills in 1979, Atlantic Empress, I think you referenced, off of Tobago as well, right?
Off Tobago.
So here it is, we are in 2024, and it is as though we are reinventing the wheel, and therefore it's not a matter of casting blame. The question is, are we going to reinvent the wheel even yet again? And there's no execution, there's no implementation. We are no better off having had this contingency plan from 2013, and we are 11 years later.
Well, it would appear so, I would like to think that it is not exactly so and that answers would come. I just want to, I know that I tend to be I'm an academic.
Yes.
So and I'm not into the politics. So I will say something that I think is interesting based on what you have said there. I want to go back to 2013 because the date of that oil spill, it coincides in a way with the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan. And this is what then President Kimona said. He has spent his entire life in the communities which sprouted around the local oil industry, and so is very much aware of what can go wrong in the oil belt. There is no denying that something went woefully wrong just before Christmas last year, Kimona said. Men fear most the things they do not fully understand, and in the absence of clear and accurate information, citizens approach events with trepidation, fear, and even anger. When misinformation abounds, ignorance rules. And it's almost like we feel deja vu. We are back here in 2024, 11 years later, and we are still talking about information. There is still fear. There is still the absence of certainty. There's still trepidation. So I think we are entitled to ask, why are we here still?
Yes.
You could have read this and think you're talking about 2024 and this incident. The exact things. I've been reading on Facebook. Even as I say, I am hearing an academic like Professor Judy Gobin saying, we need to know, why is it taking so long? We want information. You know, and a lot of people are asking that question. And again, it leads to speculations. So I am hoping that at the end of this exercise, that there'll be clarity, there'll be a way forward, because it clearly is unacceptable for us to have taken from Sunday when booms are finally coming in place. 4 days when you are trying through volunteers. And let me say this, you talk about volunteers. One of the things that happened out of some of the disasters in the developed world is that you don't wait until now for volunteers. We are an hydrocarbon sector. You get your volunteers early when there's no spill. You do basic training. You have them alert as to what is taking place. So you're not out there putting an ad on the papers, welcoming people to come to Tobago to volunteer. You have people who have some basic understanding and experience in handling hydrocarbons, oil spill, know what equipment they're supposed to put on.
Yes.
You can't put on a COVID-19 mask because to start with, it's the mask that most people wear, these $2 and $3 masks, will not protect you from the inhalation of hydrocarbon fumes.
Yep.
Right? So that is one thing that I'm worried about, and I trust that some of these volunteers would, monitor their health. They may suffer from some nausea and so on. I mean, you're hoping it doesn't happen, right? Because people went out there and people were asked to go out there it was good intention. But again, maybe this is the part that comes out if we set up this National Reserve Corps to deal with emergency response and so on.
You mentioned, whether it be from an academic perspective or even otherwise, that the question would arise, where is the information? Why isn't it as forthcoming as we would expect, knowing the gravity of the situation?
Yes.
I use that to just interject with something that I read. Now, I referenced earlier the Sunday 11th February press conference, jointly chaired by the THA Chief Sec and the Prime Minister. And today I'm reading, this is an article in The Guardian, Farley accuses government of hiding info on oil spill vessel. Now I know you were referencing more technical information, but it is interesting that he says, and this is what is cited, Chief Secretary Farley Augustine was saying in a press conference yesterday that he was suggesting that the government may have withheld critical information it had on the vessel early on. And this now goes to, I suppose, information which he feels that if the government had information on it, maybe there could have been more enforcement action. I take that to mean that from Chief Secretary Farley, if it is we knew that this vessel was en route to Guyana, the vessel belongs to another party from another country, that maybe some recourse could have been sought at a very earlier stage to get other players involved, more international assistance, certainly from these other countries, whether it be Guyana, whether it be Panama, whosoever it may have been. He said that he thanked the ministry for releasing the vessel's name, now that we know the vessel's name, suggesting that it only came after the information was put out in the public. So I don't know if you have any comment on that, what you make out of the fact that whilst he is limiting it to the vessel, the identity of the vessel, is he also pointing to the fact that, look, information is not as forthcoming as it ought to be between the entities, Ministry of Energy obviously being a lead entity, and national security, right, being the one who would be oversee Coast Guard, etc., and the THA. Is that something that you detected based on what the news are pointing to?
No, I haven't detected that, and I will not step into that area. Not because of fear or anything, because I'll tell you this. The importance of knowing, having information about the vessel is not at this point to prosecute anyone. We have time to do that. The importance is to have an understanding, as Gary pointed out, what exactly is inside that vessel. How much crude oil is inside it. If you know the amount of crude oil, you have a fair idea of the amount of crude oil, it helps you in your containment and cleanup efforts. If you know it is maybe just 500 barrels, 1,000 barrels, 1,500 barrels, 500 barrels, that helps you to determine what resources you need. So that it is critical to try to pursue information as to the vessel, but I don't see it from the point at this stage in terms of prosecution. That will come. That information will emerge. I am concerned that as Gary said there, and another thing, sometimes these vessels carry other chemicals. It may not be hydrocarbon alone. So we don't know if it was just crude oil, or they may have stored some other chemicals that might be used in the petrochemical sector or the petroleum sector. We don't know. And that is where I think it is important that we would have pressed very early to get the type of information to understand the threat that we are facing. Dealing with the perpetrators of the threat, that is another story.
Well, one of the issues certainly raised would be, and I saw the Chief Secretary asking this question, who is going to compensate for this damage? The damage to the environment is one part of it, a major part of it, but then there's also the spill-on effect on the fishermen, the tourist industry, hoteliers, all of the persons who are affected in Tobago immediately by this. Do you have, based on your knowledge, your expertise in the law, any notion, any idea as to how we may seek recourse? There's the prosecution of a criminal offense, and there's a fine that will go to the consolidated fund or whatever it may be. But is there room for compensation? Should we find who are the perpetrators, I use the word perpetrators loosely, of this event, is there room that you can have some compensation?
There are two levels of compensation that I have seen globally. For example, with the Exxon Valdez incident and both the BP incident, the companies took the lead based on the government being very firm in coming up with compensation packages and so on. So BP settled, as did the Exxon. They settled and they offered a compensation package negotiated largely by the state, the government. So yes, what we would expect is that once you identify who we are dealing with, efforts will be made to obtain an agreement so we don't have to go to litigation to obtain compensation on behalf of affected persons. But for example, if it is that is not done, then you always have the civil law of tort. And the question is that, all the nuisance, Rylands and Fletcher, all these legal principles that could come into play, but then that will mean that persons have to take personal action now in tort. Yes. And so, for example, if Grafton is affected, Grafton will file a lawsuit against the person. Where that will go, our judiciary will be clogged up for a long time, perhaps, with some of these individual lawsuits. The fisher folk can file individual lawsuits. So, we have to hope that this entity is identified, that this is a responsible entity, not no clandestine entity who will disappear under a mysterious flag.
Yes.
and will be there to sit down with the government and to deal with a package to compensate people who have been affected.
Now, in this situation, we are not giving legal advice, ladies and gentlemen. This is purely discussion purposes. Would you see recourse, the question of recourse arising for an individual, let's say a fisherman, against the state arising out of the failure to protect the borders? Let's assume it is in some way a clandestine entity allowed to enter your maritime waters, which ought not to have happened. Let's assume you can cross that hurdle. Would you venture any thoughts on that possibility?
No, I would not venture a thought on that possibility, except to say one thing. Many years ago, in doing a matter with Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, we looked at the ability of individuals to take action against the state in tort for breach of a duty of care. And there were a couple of Canadian cases that were unsuccessful. However, what I would say is that what you are seeing globally now, it's a lot of individuals, for example, bringing action with climate change. Individual actions against the state for not taking measures to abate or mitigate the effects of climate, and we are beginning to see successes. Not in our jurisdiction, of course, but we have seen in the developed world, we have seen successes over the last 3 or 4 years, clear successes where individuals have brought action against the state for breaching their duty of care with respect to the mechanisms that should have been taken to alleviate the impact of climate change. So it's all in the realm of the possibility now, based on recent trends, but that's as much as I would say.
And I appreciate that, Professor, because it is an area which, I will not say gray area, but it's an area which is now opening up. Before, you had the floodgate litigation policy, meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that you would not naturally allow claims if it would lead to floodgate of litigation. So sometimes the court would impose what is called a policy position, that because you don't want to have floodgate litigation, that everybody is going to be filing a lawsuit. And is going to put a particular entity, in this case the government or the state, as we say, under severe pressure. They would say, no, they will not allow these claims because it is very far-fetched or remote sometimes to put the blame on the government for something that is, partially within their control and largely out of their control.
But there's a matter that came up, it might have been in Kenya a couple of years ago, which is very interesting. It was one of a landmark matter where the state gave permission for a certain industry and did not properly monitor that industry, and a nearby village got affected, and they successfully sued the state for not enforcing the law and regulating properly and so on. So there is definitely a trend, a growing trend, to hold the state liable for acts of tort and the breach of the duty of care to the people that they're supposed to be protecting. But as I said, this is a long road here. We are speculating as to the role of the state. It may very well be when everything emerges. It's like Trinidad. There's a lot of conjecturing, a lot of, whether it is, what is the link Gary talk about. I hadn't given thought to his statement, but it's very interesting that a vessel going to Guyana with crude oil, right? Guyana without a refinery. So that in itself, I had never thought about it, to be quite frank, until Gary raised that issue. It's an interesting question.
Well, I wanted to pose the question to him, but time ran out, whether he would go in the realm of conjecture, right?
Yeah.
And saying, should we investigate, fuel smuggling? So some of these matters are engaging the minds of those in the public. When you hear that, what has happened, and mysteriously, the last time the tugboat was actually picked up on the radar was at a particular point in time.
Yes.
And you look at the timing, one questions how come it went off the radar for this period of time.
And you would recall, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when a vessel, for example, the situation at Paria, when they purchased fuel, supposedly, and a vessel was coming here, but the fuel was really meant for Venezuela.
Yes.
And there was all the furor and, you know, these,
Yes.
you know, you remember that incident
Yes,
a couple of
yes.
years ago. So there is scope for things like that, right? But it really is a mystery. And I mean, it's not logical what has happened. And even when you throw a red herring out there, well, maybe they're interested in a refinery. That really doesn't make sense to me because it's a refinery that is mothballed. So what are you bringing it to do what?
Correct.
So it doesn't make sense. So I really would not go. I think those are red herrings that maybe the politicians need to throw out there for their own. But
We leave that as it is
we
for
leave that
now.
as it is. But I don't think that makes much sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's one video that I would like to show at this stage so as to give us a little break on set. It is a video supplied by Mr. Gary Aboud. Maybe I can ask them to show a clip. It is a video clip of Mr. Gary's Aboud's statement before we do the Lambo video.
Dinesh, special warm welcome to Professor Ramlogan. I'm going to attempt, as you say, in 5 minutes to summarize our position. Firstly, there must be some mechanism to understand the impact, the environmental and especially the economic impact, because no one's going to eat crab. No one's going to want to eat fish. And currently, the two sectors are crippled. So there must be a clear and detailed understanding of an extrapolation of all of the domino effect impacts. Bed and breakfasts are going to be impacted. Taxi drivers are going to be impacted with loss of tourism. So the first thing is the economic impact. The second thing is the environmental and human health impact. For instance, they close 2 schools, but residents are left to breathe the air. And is there any testing being done by the Minister of Health to determine the safety of the fish? Is there anything that we can determine to give people confidence? Another issue that we want to raise is that it's still undetermined what is the total volume of the oil being carried in the tanker. There's still no plan of whether or not the vessel can be plugged. How can we stop it? There's still no statement of the booms. Where are all the booms that we're supposed to have according to the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan? And why aren't the booms there in Tobago? Why aren't there double layers of the booms? I'm sorry, no. Why aren't the skimmers in Tobago? And why aren't there double layers of the booms? Because if the oil, as we suspect, is 100,000 barrels plus in a tanker, then after a while it's going to fill the space of the boom. It needs to get out. So are they using any chemicals such as core exit like what they did in Trinidad? That's a concern. Are they being totally honest with us about what they're using and not using? These are concerns. What is the volume that the vessel was carrying? Who is responsible for liability in terms of cost? Why is it being kept a secret? Why would Guyana, I am asking, why would Guyana be a consignee for crude oil when Guyana is extracting so much crude oil? Is there any truth to rumors circulating that this hydrocarbon emanated from an embargo country, Iran? And if so, did it embark from that country because of the low cost that it would have to be paid for it compared to buying it in our country? Is it possible that the importer is a Trinidadian importer? And would the legal liability of all our 9 laws apply to a local entity if it were and is in fact truthful that it's being imported into Trinidad? Why is there so much secrecy? If it was being imported into Guyana, why don't we yet know the name of the company who's the owner? Why hasn't the Guyanese president made some statement about it? This is a major national disaster, almost a tier 3. Um, yeah, the last time we had a spill in Labrie, it was estimated was 7,000 barrels, and they were charged 20 million TT dollars. Although we've had literally hundreds of spills since then, and no one has been charged. The volume of this spill is a concern, are they going to be charged? Will that money be used partially to compensate those who are most affected? 120 years after we started the extraction of hydrocarbon, look how ill prepared we are. And now it raises the questions, is CARICOM prepared? If CARICOM, does any CARICOM nation own any booms whatsoever? With Guyana exploring and accelerating its hydrocarbon effort, and Barbados and others jumping on the hydrocarbon bandwagon, dancing on the stage of the extractive sector, shouldn't we have some sort of collaborative entity in much the same way as we have it with the oil spill contingency plan, where all of the parties would come together in an emergency? Should we have an information, resource, and emergency response sharing in CARICOM? What is CARICOM waiting on? A disaster? These are more or less some of the points that we wanted to raise. 4 minutes and 49 seconds. Yeah. Thank you so much for allowing us. Good luck to you all. Bye-bye.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I still wanted to show that clip. Before Mr. Gary Aboud, agreed that he can find the time to be with us, he did do that video for us in lieu of him appearing. But I still thought that it was a very impactful video, very insightful. And so I thought that it would not do justice to Mr. Aboud's contribution to this whole scenario if we didn't show it. So I just wanted to make sure and play that. Before we go forward with our discussion, and Professor Ram Logan is still with me, I want to show the Lambo video, which Mr. Aboud referred to earlier as one of his team members out in Tobago would have done yesterday, meaning Wednesday 14th. And so if we can show that clip as to the effect of the oil in Lambo. So again, that was, I have to, not live, but real-time footage. It was cast yesterday out of Lambo. And if I recall correctly, looking at the video in one direction, I think you would have seen one of the more prominent Tobago hotels, the sea frontage. So if it's Magdalena, one of those. So it shows that, look at the deposit of the oil on the sand. This goes back to the fact that reference has been made clearly to the fact that we have persons who are not in a position, they may be trained to some extent to treat with, assisting with collecting these hydrocarbon deposits on the shore, but they may not be properly equipped to do so. And there was reference clearly to the fact that TEMA was somehow dispensing a chemical or component called Cansorb, and this is something that you would apply on the oil. It will now cause the oil to now accumulate in globules, which you can then pick up. In Lambo, this was one of the concerns of Mr. Aboud and his team, whether or not when this oil is dissipated and cast across the sand in such a manner, whether that is something that could be properly collected. What are you going to do? How much sand are you going to scrape off the surface to be able to somehow rejuvenate and treat with the replenishing the natural state of the sand and the shore. So that is something that we will have to continue to look at. Another concern that I know he shared, and to do justice to his contribution, he spoke about the fact that you have some of the chemicals that you would apply on the oil itself that may be found floating on the surface of the water. And that itself allows you now to pass and somehow skim it, whether they absorb it with bonds or whatever it may be, absorbing bonds. What happens to that is that if it is not collected in a timely manner, it just simply drops to the bottom of the water. It goes to the level or the floor of the seabed, and it remains there. And that in itself continues to be a danger to the environment. You have taken it off the surface, but you're still destroying the environment. So these are things that we have to look at. And I wanted to use this to go to the next point because I have expert advice in studio. It is a photo of the website of the United Nations Trinidad and Tobago. And this is what was posted on Tuesday, February 13th. Dr. Sharda Mahabir from GEF Small Grants Program TNT visited Tobago to conduct an assessment of current and future needs arising from the oil spill that affected the island's marine and coastal areas. The needs identified in the assessment will feed into formal requests for assistance, which can be sent to international organizations, including the United Nations. Some of the needs identified include PPE to outfit volunteers who will continue cleanup efforts in the coming days and weeks, oil spill cleaning chemicals which can be used to remove oil from the Scarborough seawall, wetlands, and other locations, equipment to prevent further damage of the coastline in the event of a removal of the ship wreckage. Such equipment could include larger booms, underwater rover equipment, two-way radios, and transportation vehicles. Support in identifying the best possible method to remove the wreckage. The UN NTT team continues supporting authorities in Tobago and in the government of Trinidad and Tobago with the response to this biohazard emergency. Photos courtesy Dr. Sharda Mahabir of the Scarborough seawall. This is, of course, you can find it on their Facebook page. Professor, I have put this on the screen with a view to speaking to whether or not we are past the time when we should have requested or elevated our request or been more vociferous in our request for international assistance.
That one is a little tough one because, okay, so I try to stick to our contingency plan. And, you know, I think I myself need to go back and read this thoroughly because this was really very comprehensive. And one of the things I say is here, in the event of a spill being determined to be beyond the resources. So the first thing would have been to determine if it's beyond the resources. Mm-hmm. And I think that is where I believe we have not done that in a swift enough fashion. We should have been able to determine that very quickly, at least within 48 hours. Even if we take it at its best, we know the size of the vessel. You could basically do a rough calculation as to how much liquid it could possibly hold. So you have an idea. We should have known that this would have been something fairly beyond our capability. And therefore, the contingency plan, it provides for us, there's a whole section 4.8, technical advice and resources from outside of the country. It contemplates that.
Yes.
So why was that not triggered? And I think Shada, who is one of my colleagues, has really pointed out that we need to, we have to do it. We have to request it. These entities are there to assist. So I would agree that based on what I'm seeing, that maybe we could have done, not maybe, we could have done a better job at determining our ability to deal with the matter and therefore move swiftly to access the outside resources.
Now, I want to thank you for that response. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that today's program is somehow, you know, enlightening you, and certainly I myself, I am being enlightened in terms of the mitigation, response that we can see. First of all, I know, Professor, you have spoken about the need for information to be forthcoming. So I take it that real-time information should be packaged in a manner that it could be forthcoming, that, you know, we are able to take that. You have academics, you have experts who can take that and run with it. They can make suggestions. You should be able to see a clear procedure being adopted and implemented and executed according to our contingency plan.
Yes.
That is somehow a little bit hazy based on our discussion today. And moving forward, we need to know what information is available, and therefore we can put it out there and we can make informed decisions as to the way forward. At this given point in time, if you were to render some interim advice, because you don't have all the information, but based on what is out in the public, some of which or most of which you may have assimilated, what would be your advice to the line entity treating with this matter? Whether it be the Ministry of Energy, but under the contingency plan, I believe it is the Ministry of Energy.
Ministry of Energy should take charge of this matter. They should reach out, understanding their limitations. I would say reach out to the multinationals that are here, because I do believe they will have some of the things that we need. We have a lot of goodwill with them, and we need to deal with this matter as quickly as possible, because the fear is when you remove oil and you remove it from the surface, the longer it stays there, the long-term effects are greater. You know, in 2013, I was at Valdez in Alaska, and they were actually still sampling the beach, and was still finding high levels of hydrocarbon, although you're not seeing it. Because sometimes you don't see it, but it's there. You have to look at the assessment of your fisheries and things like that. There's a lot to be done. So, you know, but let me just come back to one point. And because I mean, you know, as I said, this sets it out nicely for us. There is a 1992 protocol of the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage, the CLC. Once enforced, it makes the owner of a ship carrying cargo of persistent oil in bulk strictly liable for any pollution damage in the area of Trinidad and Tobago, including the territorial waters, seabed, shores, beaches, and ecology thereof. The liability extends to post-spillage prevention and cleanup costs. Trinidad and Tobago does not have to prove that the ship was in any way at fault in causing the pollution. None of the compensation schemes apply to legal discharge. So it is very important that we determine the type of discharge, because there's the International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund, which we can access because you spoke about compensation, but it's only when we are dealing with illegal discharges. So it is important that the investigation takes place now, because, you know, from what we are seeing, this may not be a legal discharge, right? So there is that, but, you know, I think that the continuing troubling thing is there's no statement from the lead authority or the lead agency as to this is the problem, this is how we're going to approach it, this is the resources that we have. What we don't have, we're going to get it here. We're going to write the United Nations, we're going to write to the oil companies, we're going to mobilize, but we need to deal with this problem. That you're not hearing. You're hearing Tima saying something, yeah, the Prime Minister goes across there, quite correctly he says, we are dedicated to using the full national resources for Tobago. That is a good statement, but what does it mean? How does it take the process forward? What if the full national resources cannot do the cleanup in the way it has to be done?
And how does it fit into the contingency plan?
And how it fits in there. Then we have to go international. And all of that needs to be said with a clear blueprint, which is what I believe our former president, Kamona, sought when he, because if I recall the report, I don't recall the details, but it was exactly to deal with, we had lawyers there, we had, you know, biologists there were people from all the different skill sets that came together from the academic community to say, look, if this happens again, this is what we need to do. So I am a little, you know, I would love to have seen how this worked, how that worked in the context of what took place here.
In other words, we should have had check boxes, and then we would just be ticking them as we go along.
You know, when you look at this here, they talk about record keeping and preparation of claims. It's all here. Communications. In the event of an oil spill, the MEEA will be the primary coordination center. All information from the site of the spill and impacted areas will be fed into the communication system by ship to shore, shore to ship, VHF, satellite phone, or other means available. If the spill reaches a coastline, a field site will be set up to feed information into the control center. It's there. Reading this, it's impressive. I don't know if these things are there. And I've seen no evidence that it's there. It's not reinventing the wheel. A lot of time was spent doing, looking at, from when you look at this reporting system, legal, everything in there. It's all there. Public relations, everything.
Well, we have seen a lot of public relations. Ladies and gentlemen, and of course, Professor Ramlogan, I had attempted to get a member of the THA. I wouldn't disclose the name now so as to prejudice any position, but they, because of the day, their cancellation, their inability to continue to be available for the program. I will, of course, for a future program, endeavor to bring them on. Of course, to hear, what they deem to be important, their take on the matter, on behalf of the people of Tobago, of course, and what they see as being the important steps to be enforced moving forward. So I will continue to reach out to members of the THA with a view to getting maybe the Chief Sec or Miss Faith B. Israel, one of the higher ranking members of the THA to come in. That is to close that chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, we are just a few minutes before our closing. Today we started a little bit earlier than the 4:30 time. I am grateful that Professor Ramlogan was here early to be able to facilitate this because we needed to get Mr. Gary Aboud on board. Again, I want to say happy birthday to him and thank him for coming on for the initial part of our program. And moving towards our conclusion, I will give the professor any last few comments on this matter. I know you have said quite a lot, very informative, grounded in a lot of technical, not data, but technical reports that you are aware of, and I'm glad that you have brought some historical context to it as well to make us understand that really we have been here. Unfortunately, we have been here before, and what is even more unfortunate is that, seeing that we are revisiting something, a reoccurrence of a disaster of this magnitude in 2024, we seem to be reinventing the wheel when we should be ticking the boxes, so to speak. So I thank you for all that you have put on the table for us so far, but any closing comments on this matter?
Well, the one thing we have to look forward to, and I would say unless our national spill plan has been abandoned, it's what we call the post-incident report, right? Following resolution of the oil spill and termination of the response, the support agencies involved will be responsible for submission of an after-action report. And that's very important, not later than 3 days following closing of the response. That after-action report shall be submitted to the MEEA and then the final report to the Permanent Secretary Minister for approval. So we have something to look forward to. And I think we should hold our responders to producing this after-action report, because this is a useful mechanism that will allow us to do a proper, responsible, forensic analysis of what happened, what we did, and how we could improve it in the future. If we fail to generate a proper after-action report, we're going to be back to square one when it happens again.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Ramlogan, of course, is a busy gentleman. I know he has a lot of commitments. Sometimes when I am on the way to dropping my kids to school in the morning, I see him exercising, taking early morning walks. I wouldn't say where, because these days we are in treacherous times. I wouldn't want to subject him to any security risk. So I know he's a very busybody person. Professor, I want to tremendously thank you for your time coming on the program, giving of your expertise, and of course engaging in this kind of discussion for my benefit and the benefit of all those who look at this program. My hope and wish, ladies and gentlemen, is that we can curtail the environmental downtrodden effects. We can curtail the disaster that is unfolding. We can mitigate the extent of the adverse effects of this disaster, and we can have a return to some semblance of normalcy in the environmental regions, the coastal regions of Tobago. A lot of us, it is without dispute that many of us Trinidadians and all other countries, we go to Tobago as a choice destination, tourist destination. We enjoy our time in Tobago. We love the beaches in Tobago, and we don't limit ourselves to one coast in Tobago. We like to go all over. We like to visit different hotels. And so I would hope that, for Trinidad and Tobago, we see some swift response and swift curtailment of this environmental disaster. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. There's one topic that would have probably gone into a fair amount of conjecture or speculation, not diminishing the fact that it does exist in reality. That is the fuel bunkering. Maybe we will treat with that in another program, but and with possibly another guest who has some, data and some facts at their fingertips that they can point to tell us whether there's the likelihood of that still occurring in the region. And by that time, maybe we'll have more information to tell whether this was such an instance or an example of fuel bunkering taking place, illegal fuel shipments. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It has been my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. And do look on for a repeat of this program. Technical team, we will have this repeat of this afternoon's program at 9 p.m. this evening on TV Jaagaran. And of course, you can always catch reruns of this program on the Facebook feeds and the different streaming channels. Thank you very much, Sitaram, and do join us next week, Monday at 4:30 for another edition of Jaagaran, The Awakening. Thank you very much.